Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be going live for the first time. Doing our weekly wisdom this way is something we've envisioned for a little while. So we just wanted to jump right in and start with some trends for 2022. We know that when people ask us about our work, when people ask us what we do in diversity, equity, and inclusion, it can be something that people know is really important, but that people recognize can be a little amorphous. And our weekly wisdoms are meant to share research and examples of how you can replicate some of what we know works in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you're unfamiliar with who I am, I'm Natalia Eileen. I lead Scene at Work. We're a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm supporting clients of all sizes and of all industries with their DEI practices, efforts, measurements, what have you, trainings, all of that. And today I wanted to dig in with a weekly wisdom. This would be 5, maybe 10 minutes max, sharing some of the top trends that we've been seeing in 2022, or that we think we will see in 2022 when it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So without further ado, I want to talk all about that. And I have a bit of a slide deck prepared for you. Again, just 5 to 10 minutes. Let's talk about these trends. Here's what we're thinking we're going to see a lot of in DEI in 2022. I'm anticipating that we're going to be seeing people really think about what inclusion looks like on hybrid teams. I think this is something that, as you can imagine, is very front and center now with COVID upending a lot of how we work. We also will be seeing an emphasis on employee wellness because, as you can also tell by how much our time together the last year and a half, almost 2 years, has really pushed us all into thinking about our own wellness, our employee wellness. This is going to be a top trend this year. On top of that, inclusive leadership is something people are becoming more and more interested in, more and more aware of as a true and clear game changer for a lot of leaders. And lastly, measurement and accountability. There are a lot of reasons for why this is a trend that we expect to see in DEI in 2022. I'll dig into those reasons and what these might look like in a second. So to that point, I think it's important as we think about these trends to consider, okay, if I'm a leader and I care deeply about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I don't know what that will look like this year, or I still haven't wrapped my head around how I can bring my DEI efforts to the next level within my organization. My hope is that these 5 minutes will offer you some examples based on these 4 trends of how you can move forward with some of this in mind and actually seeing some changes and difference as a result. So let's go through each of these. Let's talk about each of these and let's discuss how these 4 trends can, again, give you a better sense of what to do in 2022. I want to lean into first inclusion on hybrid teams. Maybe you're aware of some of these statistics here on the right-hand side of this slide, but we know that more than 20% of workers in 2021 were working completely remotely. And we know that a ton of workers are expecting to be able to work at least in some hybrid capacity in the future in a post-pandemic world. So because of that, we need to be thinking about how we can build an inclusive workplace when our workplace and when our teams are hybrid or remote. And so this could look like increasing your attention on remote employee needs and boundaries. This can look like careful management of in-person office and meeting time. There is actually a really great article that I've been really enjoying that I think does a really great job of helping give some examples of what this could look like. If you haven't read on Harvard Business Review, Don't Let Hybrid Work Set Back Your DEI Efforts, I think it's a quick read, it's a good read, and it could give you some ideas for how you can make sure that hybrid teaming is something that's not setting you back when you're thinking about DEI. Great, that's one trend. We just talked about that. Let's go into our next trend, which is all about wellness, right? So we'll want to also think about employee wellness because we know that people are experiencing some deep and significant feelings around how the last year and a half has played out. Everyone is feeling some sort of push or pull over the last year and a half, 2 years because of it. 40% of American adults report symptoms of anxiety and depression, which is up from 10% prior to 2020. So that's significant. And then, of course, there's anxiety and tension that a lot of us have felt in our workplaces. So because of that, we'll want to keep in mind the following big ways to lean into this trend. The first is a deeper investment in employee wellness benefits and awareness of those benefits. We're seeing companies invest more in employee wellness. We're also hopefully seeing more people promote those opportunities to engage in those benefits within their workplaces. We also are seeing a proactive attention to burnout. We know that we were seeing a lot of burnout in 2021. And so leaders are now shifting a lot of their attention to make sure that they're being more proactive about that. So considering ways that you can do that can be a great way to lean into this trend this year. Next trend we have for ourselves is all about inclusive leadership. We are seeing more and more people invest in inclusive leadership, and that's exciting for us. We do provide inclusive leadership training, but it's exciting for us more so because we know how powerful this can be. As you can see in the why it's a trend section of this slide, unfortunately, BIPOC employees are way more likely to experience microaggressions at work, and this has been the case for a long time. But luckily, a lot of leaders are now becoming more aware of that and more interested in doing something about that. So that number 400% references the fact that Black women experience 400% more microaggressions than white women do in the workplace. That's based off of McKinsey's Women in the Workplace study, which if you haven't read that report, I suggest you do. We also know that underrepresented employees often resort to covering, which is a term used to describe holding back, maybe not paying attention or allowing your full self to come through, not paying attention to your true needs in a workplace. And that's detrimental to workplace productivity and to so many other things. And now leaders are really starting to pay attention to this. So this trend is looking like an increased investment in inclusive leadership, which is exciting, and an acknowledgement of DEI efforts in performance reviews for leaders. That is beyond exciting for us. This measure of valuing and truly acknowledging how important DEI can be is beautiful. So hopefully you're doing your reading and your research around inclusive leadership. Last trend, and then we'll bring it home here. Our last trend is all about measurement and accountability. Now, here's one thing I'll say actually before we fully talk about this particular trend. It has been almost 2 years since George Floyd was murdered and since we all saw a deep interest and investment of time and energy into the Black Lives Matter movement and into recognizing how important this is even in corporate spaces, which is, the Black Lives Matter movement has been around for quite a while, but it's been beautiful to see how corporate environments that have historically not paid as much attention to racial equity and whatnot are now doing so. And so it's been about 2 years. And now in 2022, we're seeing that more and more organizations, companies, and leaders are trying to understand what progress has been made since making those investments in 2020. How are we continuing to level ourselves up and hold ourselves accountable to actually moving forward in this way? So that's what this trend is all about. Let's look into this here. As you can see, it's a trend because it's the second year, the second anniversary of George Floyd's death. We also know that there is 40% of the global workforce is considering leaving their jobs, and that was a stat from last year. But we are seeing a super tight job market right now, and some of that comes from a desire to see companies truly engage with these topics, right? The heightened interest from our employees in DEI is palpable. So what can you do? You can create executive scorecards holding leaders accountable to DEI. You can release publicly available reports and data showing DEI efforts so that those prospective candidates know exactly where you stand. Okay, that was a bit of a whirlwind. That was about 10 minutes of your time. Again, my hope is that every week we come to you and we bring you some great information about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what it means, what you can do, and what research is out there, maybe some resources that you'd find helpful. I'll try to post a couple of the items that I shared today with you in some of my social media, just in case you're following there. But if you have any questions or want to learn more about us, you can do so at cnetwork.com. Thank you, everyone.